Tonight's story comes from a listener named Alex, who found himself alone in his family's old Victorian house during a blizzard. What started as a cozy, isolated evening quickly spiraled into something far more disturbing. Listen closely, and remember, sometimes the silence is the loudest scream. Story 1 begins. My parents had gone to a last-minute conference, leaving me, a 17-year-old, alone in our sprawling, 3-story Victorian home. It was a beautiful but ancient structure, with creaking floorboards and drafts that seemed to whisper through the walls. A blizzard had descended, blanketing the world in a thick, white silence. Initially, I was excited. I made myself some hot chocolate, settled into the living room, and turned on a movie. But the storm outside was relentless. The wind howled, and the snow beat against the windows like a relentless drumbeat. Around midnight, the power flickered, then died. The house plunged into absolute darkness, save for the faint glow of the snow outside. I found a flashlight and some candles, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But the silence was oppressive. It was a silence broken only by the wind and a strange, low static that seemed to emanate from the walls. At first, I dismissed it as the old house settling. But the static grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like a distorted radio, a constant low buzz that vibrated through the floorboards. I tried to pinpoint its source, but it seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, the cold intensified. It was a bone-chilling cold, far beyond what the blizzard could account for. My breath turned to visible plumes in the air, a tease. Frost forming on the inside of the windows. Intricate patterns that seemed to shift and writhe in the candlelight. I decided to check the basement, thinking maybe a pipe had burst. The basement was always cold, damp, and unsettling, with its dirt, floor, and stone walls. As I descended the creaking stairs, the static grew deafening. The air grew heavy, thick with a metallic tense in the far corner. I saw it. A faint, pulsating light emanating from behind a stack of old, dusty boxes. As I approached, the static reached a fever pitch, and the light grew brighter, revealing a small antique radio, its dials spinning wildly, emitting the distorted buzz. But the radio wasn't plugged in. I reached out, my hand trembling, to touch it. As my fingers brushed the cold metal, the static stopped abruptly. The radio went silent, and the light vanished. Then I heard a whisper. A faint, raspy voice, just barely audible above the howling wind. It seemed to come from the walls themselves. A voice that spoke in a language I didn't understand, yet somehow I knew. It was a language of cold, of static, of something else. I fled, scrambling up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. I barricaded myself in my room, pushing furniture against the door. Static returned, softer now, but still there, a constant, menacing hum that vibrated through the house. I spent the rest of the night huddled under my blankets, listening to the wind and the static, waiting for the dawn. When the first rays of sunlight finally peeked through the windows, the static was gone. The house was silent, save for the wind. My parents returned later that day, finding me exhausted and shaken. They dismissed my story as a product of fear and isolation, but I knew what I had heard. I knew what I had felt, and I knew that the static was still there, lurking within the walls, waiting for the next storm, the next moment of silence. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that something else resides within those old walls, something that speaks in static and breathes cold. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear it, whispering my name. All right, settle in, because this one's a slow burn. The house creaked. Not a dramatic, floorboard groaning creak, but a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. Sarah had always been attuned to the noises of her old Victorian home, but tonight, the silence between the usual creaks felt ... thick, heavy. Her parents were at a late-night symphony performance, leaving her, a high school senior, alone for the first time in months. She'd relished the quiet, the chance to finally binge-watch that horror series everyone was talking about. It was around 1 a.m. The glow of the laptop screen casting long, distorted shadows across the living room. The rain outside, a constant, gentle patter against the leaded glass windows, had lulled her into a false sense of security. She paused the show, the sound of a woman's terrified scream hanging in the air. A shiver ran down her spine, not entirely due to the on-screen horror. Then, she heard it. A faint tap-tap coming from upstairs. It's probably just a branch against the window, she muttered, trying to convince herself. She knew the old oak outside the master bedroom window had a tendency to do that, but the rhythm was wrong. It's too steady. To deliberate, tap 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 tapped, held her breath, listening intently. The sound wasn't coming from the window, it was coming from inside the house. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. She grabbed her phone, fingers trembling as she dialed her dad's number. No answer. She tried her mom, straight to voicemail. Panic tightened its grip. Tap dash, 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 tap dot dot. The sound was closer now, clearer. It was coming from the hallway, just outside the living room. Sarah slowly rose, her gaze fixed on the darkened hallway. The laptop screen illuminated her face, a mask of fear in the flickering light. She considered running, bolting out the front door and down the street. But the rain was coming down harder now, and the thought of being outside, exposed, was even more terrifying. She decided to investigate. Maybe it was just the house settling, a loose pipe, anything but what her gut was screaming at her. She grabbed a heavy antique brass candlestick from the mantel. Her knuckles white, with the candlestick held like a weapon, she crept towards the hallway. The tap-tap was louder now, almost directly outside the living room door. She took a deep breath and peered around the corner. Nothing. The hallway was dark. The only light coming from the faint glow of the street lamps through the rain-streaked windows. She scanned the hallway, her eyes straining to see through the shadows. Tap, tash, tap, dash, tap, dot, dot. Tap, dash, tap, dash, tap, dot, dot. The sound was coming from the stairs, leading up to the second floor. She knew she should just go back to the living room, lock the doors, and wait for her parents. But curiosity, or perhaps a morbid sense of dread, compelled her to move forward. She ascended the stairs, each creak of the old wood echoing like a gunshot in the silence. The tap-tap was now a constant, rhythmic beat, like a metronome counting down to some unknown horror. She reached the top of the stairs, her breath catching in her throat. The hallway stretched before her, dark and foreboding. The master bedroom door at the far end of the hall was slightly ajar. The tap-tap was coming from inside. With trembling hands, she pushed the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the rain-streaked window. She couldn't see anything. Then, she heard it. A soft, wet thump. She flicked on the light switch. The room was empty. except for the old ornate mirror on the far wall, a teen. The small red stain spreading across the carpet in front of it. She took a step closer, her eyes fixed on the stain. It looked like paint. Then she saw it. It's reflected in the mirror, behind her. A figure, standing in the doorway. Tall and thin, its face obscured by the shadows. In its hand, a small, silver hammer. Dripping with something dark. Tap 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 tapped apt apt tapped apt apt in its hand. Ascend in its hand. A small, a sylve, a mere, a sylve, mere, a mere, a sylve, mere, mere, I, mere, and with a, as and when we saying Sarah screamed, but it was too late. The figure stepped forward, its face now visible. A pale, gaunt face with eyes that were black and empty. The last thing Sarah saw was the hammer rising, its descent, a silent, terrifying promise. The rain continued to fall, washing the red stain down the hallway into the darkness. The house creaked. A gentle, almost comforting sound, and the tap dash tap dash tap dot dot dot. A K finally stopped. Generate audio overview. The thaw had come reluctantly, a slow, oozing surrender of winter's grip. Patches of sickly green pushed through the mud, and the air, usually crisp and biting, hung heavy with the damp, earthy scent of burgeoning life. Sarah, home alone for the first time in months, found the transition unsettling. The silence of the house, usually a comfort, now felt like a taut membrane stretched over something unseen. Her parents had driven to a distant nursery, or a rare splurge on flowering shrubs, leaving her with a simple instruction: just relax, enjoy the quiet. But the quiet wasn't enjoyable. It was a suffocating blanket, punctuated by the drip, drip, drip of melting snow from the eaves, each drop a tiny, echoing hammer blow in the stillness. She tried to focus on her book, but her eyes kept drifting to the windows. The bare branches of the oak outside, usually a familiar silhouette, now seemed to writhe and twist in the faint breeze, like skeletal fingers reaching for the glass. The shadows lengthened, distorting the familiar shapes of furniture into something alien and menacing. A sudden, sharp tap from the back of the house made her jump. It wasn't the rhythmic drip of melting snow. This was a distinct, deliberate sound. She held her breath, listening. Silence. Then, another tap, slightly louder this time, followed by a faint scratching sound. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She told herself it was just a branch, scraping against the siding. APA. Squirrel. But the rationalizations felt thin, flimsy. She crept towards the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the cold tile. The back door. A heavy, oak affair with a small, frosted glass window, was locked. She peered through the glass, her breath fogging the surface. Just the overgrown flower beds, still littered with the remnants of winter dot. Another tap, this time from the window beside the sink. She spun around, her eyes wide. The window was streaked with dirt and grime, obscuring the view. She wiped a clear patch with her sleeve and peered out. Nothing. She was starting to doubt her sanity. It was probably just the house settling. the old wood groaning and shifting with the change in temperature. She turned back to the sink, intending to wash her face, when she saw it. A small, muddy handprint, pressed against the outside of the frosted glass. The fingers were long and thin, almost skeletal, the nails dark and ragged. A cold dread washed over her, a primal fear that rooted her to the spot. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her throat was constricted, her lungs frozen. Then, the scratching started again, louder now, a frantic, desperate sound. It was coming from the back door. She could feel the vibrations through the soles of her feet. She backed away, her eyes fixed on the door. The scratching grew more intense, a relentless, rhythmic scraping that echoed through the silent house. Then, a low, guttural thump, as if something heavy had been thrown against the door. Sarah stumbled backwards, her hand reaching for the phone on the kitchen counter. Her fingers trembled as she dialed her parents' number. The phone rang and rang. No answer. Another thump, harder this time, followed by a sickening crack. The frosted glass of the back door spiderwebbed, a network of white lines spreading across. The surface. She dropped the phone, her breath catching in her throat. She could hear the scratching again, closer now, a frantic, desperate scrabbling. Then, a voice, a low, rasping whisper that seemed to slither through the cracks in the door. Let me. And Sarah turned and ran, her bare feet pounding on the cold tile, her heart screaming in her ears. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. She burst through the front door, the spring air suddenly cold and sharp against her skin. She didn't look back. She just ran, her lungs burning, her mind filled with the image of the muddy handprint, the cracked glass, and the whispering voice that seemed to follow her, echoing in the damp, spring air. Generate audio overview. All right, settle in. This one's about a strange winter night, and the unsettling feeling of being utterly alone. Or so you thought. The blizzard hit Blackwood Creek like a freight train. Just a few hours before, the town square had been twinkling with pre-Christmas cheer, carols echoing down the snowy streets. Now, it was a white, howling void. My parents, predictably, had decided that this was the perfect night for a last-minute shopping trip to the neighboring town, a good hour away. "We'll be back before you know it, Liam," my mom had said, her voice barely audible over the rising wind. Liam, a lanky 14-year-old, was left alone in our old, creaky Victorian house. It's the kind of house where the wind howled through the gaps. In the window frames and the floorboards groaned with every shift in temperature. I wasn't scared, not really. Just ... It's profoundly alone. The power flickered, then died. The house plunged into a darkness that seemed to amplify the storm's fury. I lit a few candles, their flickering flames casting long dancing shadows that played tricks on my eyes. The wind picked up, rattling the windows like skeletal fingers. I decided to distract myself. I went to the living room, where the old grandfather clock ticked with a slow, deliberate rhythm, each tick a tiny hammer blow in the suffocating silence. I pulled out a worn copy of a sci-fi novel and settled into the armchair, the candlelight casting a warm glow on the pages. Then I heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from the back of the house. It was a rhythmic, almost deliberate scratching, like nails on wood. Just a branch, I told myself, trying to ignore the growing unease. The scratching continued, teased louder now, and I could feel a cold dread creeping up my spine. I stood up, the book falling to the floor with a soft thud. I held a candle aloft, its flame wavering, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. I crept towards the back of the house, my heart pounding in my ears. The kitchen was dark and cold, the wind whistling through the cracks in the old wooden door leading to the back porch. Scratching was coming from there. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. I turned it slowly, the old hinges groaning in protest. I pulled the door open, the wind howling in my face, sending a blast of icy air into the house. The back porch was covered in a thick blanket of snow. The only light came from the candle in my hand, casting a small, wavering circle of illumination. I scanned the porch, my eyes straining to see through the swirling snow. Nothing, just the wind, the snow, and the shadows. Then I saw it. A dark shape, huddled against the far corner of the porch. It was small, almost childlike. I took a step forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The shape moved, and I saw a flash of pale skin and a pair of eyes, reflecting the candlelight, glowing with an unnatural intensity. The scratching sound stopped, and then a small, pale hand with long, thin fingers reached out from the shadows and gently tapped against the glass of the kitchen window right behind me. I spun around, the candle falling from my grasp, plunging me into darkness. The scratching started again, this time from inside the house, just inches from my ear. The grandfather clock chimed, a deep resonant tone that echoed through the empty house. Latte 4-5. Each chime a cold, heavy weight in the suffocating silence. Then I heard a whisper, a soft, chilling whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "You're not alone, Liam." It's the sound of the front door opening, and the sound of my parents' voices, and the sudden light of the car headlights felt like a dream, but the feeling of icy dread and the faint smell of wet, earthy dirt remained. I never told them about the eyes or the whisper. I told myself it was just the wind, the old house, and my overactive imagination. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. And I know, deep down, that something was there, in the darkness, watching, and it knew my name.